Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the last session of our 2022 series, S4HANA versus CCC, understanding your options as a supply chain operations user, manager, and leader. For those of you that have followed this whole series, we have taken a deep dive into what is different between S4 and ECC. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, they are available on demand on the Reveal website. Today, we're going to join in discussion with Sean and Jason around S4HANA versus ECC in the areas of asset management. This will be our final webinar for the 2022 year, and we have a full schedule planned for 2023. Today's presentation is going to last approximately 30 minutes, followed by some time for question and answers at the end. If you could, please capture your questions in the chat or the question section, and we'll go ahead and get to those towards the end of the webinar. At this time, I would like to introduce you to today's speakers, Sean Elliff and Jason Dyer. Sean, a senior partner here at Reveal, responsible for driving the delivery of supply chain optimization, transformational improvement programs across the globe. He has more than 20 plus years of strategic business experience building situation-based interventions and supply and solutions that drive business to achieve effective delivery and improve business efficiency. Jason, a business maturity advisor here at Reveal, also has 20 plus years of experience in a variety of roles across the supply chain. Jason has extensive experience implementing and supporting SAP solutions with expertise in P2P and OTC maintenance and reliability, transportation, and WM in both hands-on and leadership roles. So let's please welcome Jason and Sean, and if you could both take the floor.
Thank you, Kelly. That's awesome. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Just very quickly, high level. This is what we're going to. Well, Jason, you're on there. Do you want to say hello as well? I mean,
hey, Sean, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
feels like one of those conversations we should be having over a cold beer, but
you know, that would be better to have it over a cold beer. All right, well, today, guys, we're going to be focusing on 4 areas. We're going to talk a little bit about strategic vision in the context of EAM, ECC, and S4HANA. We'll look at some of the value offerings. We'll talk about visibility and process integration and why it's important, and then really just focus on some new capabilities in and around S4HANA and around Fiori. So, Jason, you wanted to ask a question I think you had around the strategic vision and where that plays out.
Yeah, Sean, you know, I think we've seen from a lot of our clients and out in the marketplace in general that there's kind of a perception that S4 is just going to change everything immediately, and make our life easy, and kind of an easy button, so to speak. So I just wanted to know if you could maybe dispel that rumor for those attending and speak a little reality, if you will.
Oh, 100%. I think it's important up front. I mean, from a functionality point of view, there's not a huge, massive difference between ECC and what we're going to be seeing in S4HANA. So any of those issues and challenges that you've had in the one space is really going to come across into the other. And I think it's important, you know, in order to dispel this notion that there is just no easy button to push, that you know, we have to think about it holistically. What does the holistic strategy look like that incorporates people, process, technology, all of these things together, as we've done in ECC for so many years. But when we talk about a supply chain transformation process, in the enterprise asset management space, it's no different to if we were in purchasing or in production or supply chain end to end. You know, we really need to clean out the clutter, as we call it. Some people talk about the junk. And then implement processes that are going to prevent us from going back to where we were before. But to answer the issue around not an easy button, you know, here's really why. If we take a look from an overall model perspective, this is what we bump into directly when we get into the EAM space around data analysis and reporting and driving to integration. And I mean, first of it all starts off with the business objectives. You know, are we clear on what the business objectives are? You know, are we looking to reduce total cost of asset ownership? Are we looking to increase our EHS risk? Are we looking to optimize spares? What is it? What are the business objectives that we are chasing after as we go through our process. Then we've got to get down to the notion of, well, okay, that said, what are the business strategies? Are we going for a reliability-centered maintenance approach? Are we looking at condition-based maintenance? Is it total productive maintenance, etc.? What is the strategies that we're trying to apply? And those objectives and strategies pushes us directly into the area of process. So therefore, what are the processes that we're going to be addressing in terms of either asset lifecycle or work management, planning and scheduling, etc.? Making sure these are aligned so that when we get into system, which in this case is SAP EAM specifically, and the S4 environment of that, how do all of these things align, and how are they set up, configured, and put into play from a systems perspective? And the reason that that's so important is that we need to make sure there's other things that are happening. One is around data integrity. We spoke about getting rid of the clutter and cleaning it up. So what does the data look like in our system? Can we trust it? Is it reliable? And then secondly, having trusted data, having the right business objective strategies and processes all configured, now we can start to process the data, and that we can execute our maintenance plans against it. And ultimately, off the back of that, we're able to report. And with this as a kind of a model, that gives us an ability to continually look at revising either the objectives or the performance that we have in front of us, updating our EAM strategy and the like. But I think just in a nutshell, put this together, there is no easy button, guys. We have to make sure that we get all the foundational things in place and make sure that we're addressing those issues. And I think off the back of that, maybe just to touch on a couple of big picture issues around strategy as well. If we look at that model, we really then also need to overlay this along the performance layers that the business is busy with and that needs to be addressing. So we have organizational dynamics all the way from our vision and mission right down to our objectives. There's the notion of asset condition management. What is our approach? What is our strategy? We need to apply this in order to get best practice lived out in our environment. What's the deal with our reliability strategy, and how are we managing that in terms of moving to a reliability-centered maintenance approach, or how do we manage risk, and then ultimately to execute? So that whole model of the easy button, so to speak, overlay on top of that these performance layers, and then you also you get an insight into the fact that from an S4HANA perspective and that strategy, we're looking to how do you help the organization digitally transform the operational processes that they're busy with? And how do we, as a result of that, enable us to move to proactive maintenance where there's a common view of everything across the organization? And to do that, we need to enable strategy, we need to manage risk, we need to have full involvement of different employees and different people across the board, so we have this cross-functional coming together. And put that in a nutshell, and guess what? The outcome of that are the benefits that we're looking to achieve as a result of it. So Jason, I know this is something that you've given a lot of thought to this, and would you maybe just share with us a little bit on helping to summarize that journey? And you've got a great slide, I think, that talks to it. Do you want to maybe just talk us through that?
Yeah. So one of the things I've seen a lot, and I think we've seen it in other areas besides the EAM, but particularly in the EAM, is that we typically find some fragmentation in the way that things are built out from a process perspective. We've got manufacturing on one side and maintenance on the other side, and finance on the third side, and not everybody's working in conjunction with each other. And so sometimes the strategies collide and they don't properly serve each other. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is you don't have the right data being captured to really drive a proper reliability strategy. And I go back, debated years ago around downtime in particular. A lot of people don't think of downtime in SAP, if you will, as a tool to drive reliability. It's more usually just around, what's our production efficiencies, and it's a great tool for accounting, and being a former accountant, I can speak to that.
Right.
if you really think of it holistically and consider that as informing the reliability strategy and using those downtime events to really drive reliability investigation into root cause and things like that, it becomes a huge deal. So that's, I think as we look at the strategy holistically, it's getting everybody aligned. We use process aligned teams in our model, and it's really getting all the different constituencies in a room to align both on strategy and then within the day-to-day processes. So doing that, it informs the root cause analysis, it informs the ability to do continuous improvement, informs the strategy around risk management and the risk matrix around assets and what our strategy is in terms of running those things. So I think ultimately it leads to better asset condition, longer asset life and reduced downtime. So, and as we layer those processes in and we introduce that data integrity that's so important, it helps us to kind of facilitate the journey from reactive to condition-based and ultimately up to predictive and prescriptive. But if you just start trying to turn on some of that advanced stuff right out of the gate and your data integrity isn't solid, it's not going to give you a good picture. So I think that's really important to think about the overall strategy from end to end.
Excellent. No, that's absolutely on the button, right? Okay. So, in terms of taking that into maybe to the next level, and Jason, you asked me a question the other day around saying, well, okay, what's the why behind this? I mean, what are the benefits that we get out of it, and what is it that we're actually chasing after? And to talk to that, I think there's just a couple of issues that are useful to reflect on. If we get this right and we embrace best practice, the strategic imperative for the organization is to ensure that we have optimal equipment, machine, and plant uptime. I mean, that's one of the goals we're chasing after. We spend a lot of money. You think about some of the rigs out at sea, the oil rigs, etc. There's this huge investment that's made out there. You think about our big manufacturing organizations, a lot of investments. So how do we keep all of that equipment, etc., up and going? What are some of the cost savings opportunities? There are tremendous cost saving opportunities if we get the maintenance piece right and we avoid what we call the unnecessary. The next is around extending the life of the equipment and the machines that we have. Proper maintenance, particularly if we can get into predictive and preventive maintenance kind of arena, then certainly we're an ability to extend that life and mitigate risk. Bring down the risk and bring down the potential for any environmental damage that might go with the fact that we haven't been keeping up to par on our maintenance approach. We would have an opportunity then to reduce the repair time, and that's always good. I mean, there's significant opportunity if we can have the right parts available at the right time, we've got the right skills where they need to be, we've got the tools available, etc. We can start to reduce that, and obviously at the end of it, manage any obsolescence that comes as a result of it by making sure that we have the right inventory in place. And I think in that conversation, Jason, we saw a number of benefits that research is showing us are there for the taking. And if we think about productivity, I mean, these are some of the figures that come out of the McKinseys of this world, the ASAGs of this world, etc. That a significant increase in maintenance productivity is possible when we get best practice in place. We've spoken about the reduction in equipment time. We've spoken about savings in terms of the cost of materials. I mean, a 10% savings in material cost is huge. That's significant.
Absolutely.
The decrease in the inventory maintenance and repair process. And of course, whatever we put in, getting payback. I mean, the whole notion around return on investment is really important for businesses today. And to your point, Jason, when you spoke about moving towards that predictive maintenance, here's some additional, I mean, these are even higher. This research that shows that if you're in a predictive maintenance environment and you've got that working for you, well, guess what? Here we're talking reducing downtime 30 to 35%. That is phenomenal. So despite high levels of the fact that people are interested in predictive maintenance, there's recognition of the value, etc., that goes into it. Sometimes we're just not getting enough in the predictive space, and we continue to stay in the reactive space. And some of the statistics that make up our maintenance work suggest that, you know, between reactive and preventive, it's probably more of a 50-50 deal, and predicted even being lower. So if we had 20% of our maintenance work was from a predictive environment, we're sitting at about 40% between reactive and preventive. So that's still 40% of reaction coming in there, which begs the question, you know, are we really getting the full return on investment from the process that we were thinking about? You know, return on investment about the install cost, the life cycle, the best practices, and so on. So Jason, I don't know if you want to follow up on anything of that. Why is it so hard then? You know, that we.
Well, I think the firefighting mentality is definitely pretty entrenched in a lot of organizations. You know, we talk a lot about you know, we reward the heroic effort. So machine goes down and everybody swarms it. And meanwhile, I remember a conversation I had years ago in the paper industry. Had a big outage and it was unexpected, and all the maintenance guys swarmed this one area. And I was talking to someone in a different area the following week, and they're like, yeah, we still got leaks all over the place. They didn't take the opportunity to come out here, and, you know, that unexpected downtime, they're not taking advantage of that time to go fix other things that maybe are opportunistic when you have an outage. So I think that heroic fight is rewarded more so than a well thought out plan that's executed effectively. So data integrity, as we touched on earlier, is a big deal too. Go ahead, Sean.
No, I just said that's a really important, that the hero versus zero kind of thing. I think you raised an interesting dynamic there. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
No, that's fine. I think data integrity is so important because it informs the discussion. So I just talked about opportunistic maintenance. You know, when you do get unexpected downtime, well, if your backlog is properly maintained and coded so that you know where those opportunities are, you can react to those fairly quickly. And that takes really good planning and consistency of your data. And then I think the biggest thing is, and honestly, we see this all over the place, Sean, is that it's just the change management gets ignored. We put in flashy new systems and we give some people a little bit of training, and we expect them to just buy in and go do it. And often it's people that have been in this world for a long time, and you know, there's not a lot of time spent on what's in it for me. How does it make my life better? How is my new role or my change in the way I do things every day really contributing to these benefits that we see for the organization? So I think all of that, you can't just throw the technology in and hope. It's got to be well thought out, and we've got to really educate people on how they fit in the process. So I think that's really what drives a lot of the challenges with this and why it's so often not successful.
Wow, so thanks. I mean, Jay, you mentioned firefighting, the data integrity, change management. Those are three really, really key dynamics that need to be uppermost in our mind and used to drive that forward. That's awesome, Jason. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay, so what we thought we'd do now is just talk a little bit, Jason, around some of the value offerings from S4 HANA EAM, and I know you've got some thoughts on that, and you shared with us a couple of really good slides that puts us in place. So I'm going to hand it over to you on these next two slides and ask you to just talk us through that as we go forward. All right.
Sure. I think the first one, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the thing in regards to asset EAM in general, but specifically within S4 now, it's just one piece of that digital core. So the strategy with SAP to kind of enable the digital core in S4 and then attach it to peripheral solutions around the outside edges of it. You know, it's really important to understand, and it sits in there and it's integrated with all of the other processes. So manufacturing and supply chain, particularly around the MRO inventory management. You know, it's even tied into sales if you're doing customer service for, you know, maintenance type processes. So think of it as the building block, so to speak, of a larger strategy, which we'll get into a little bit later on as the process matures. You know, a couple things here. Obviously, the Internet of Things is really big, and S4 makes that a little bit easier. We've got mobility in the mix with Fiori and some mobile applications and things like that that just really enable the process. So super important to think about. This is just step one and foundational to some of the bigger things we might do down the road.
Okay, so and I mean, based on that, then of course, I think the S4 HANA Asset Management Pro brings a value proposition which is useful. Do you want to maybe just share some thoughts around that value proposition?
Sure. I mean, I think the real-time visibility is a big deal. The onboard analytics that S4 brings to the table are fantastic. You know, it's just at a different level than what we've had in previous environments, and can provide a different type of insight. Again, assuming we've established that data integrity we keep harping on. You know, it does, the S4 brings with it a whole new structure in terms of the database, if you're not familiar with that. But one of the things that it does is really simplify the accounting side of things.
Yes.
If you can imagine, the 30 or so FICO tables that live in ECC are condensed into a single table in S4 HANA, which just allows us much more capability around managing costs and tracking costs against our budgets and forecasts and doing simulations. So that comes into play in maintenance with some of the Fiori apps and the ability to better track where we are from a cost perspective. And also think about, I talked about integrating the whole process from end to end, and you know, the downtime events becoming a maintenance event. And so you can really get to a better picture of what your true cost of downtime is. And ultimately that's going to lead to driving costs down, you know, supporting some of those industry standard type approaches as well. So there's a lot to unpack here, and S4 is a pretty big enabler in the grand scheme of things.
All righty, you know, that's awesome. And I think what you're saying, that kind of leads us to, you know, what the desired outcome should look like. I mean, if we're looking at, you know, how do we get our plan, our schedule, and our actual to align itself and to be one with, you know, where we're trying to take the end-to-end supply chain integration. And if you look at this model here, this is really about trying to align your plan with your schedule, with your actual. You know, functionality like the maintenance planning board. There's a different planning board in S4, but it's still there. There was the old planning board, which was in ECC. That will transition away from that. But if one looks at what it's trying to do, it's really trying to get us to say, if we followed that model which we set up front about our easy button, our so-called easy button, we're able then to initiate all of this work, you know, through the notifications to work orders, job cards to execute against, manage the closeout, etc. All of that comes into play. And then in addition to that, it helps us from an availability point of view to better utilize MRP, and as a result of that MRP giving us the right materials at the right time, at the right place. And of course, there's a bunch of capabilities in there, and you might want to comment on one or two of these, Jason. But I mean, the drag and drop capabilities are there. We can remove constraints. We can schedule inside of it. And then this notion of corrective and preventative maintenance activities really does become something that's day in the life of. I'm not sure if you've got any comments on this scenario, Jason.
I think it lays it out well, and I think one of the cool things, we'll talk a little bit more here in a bit with some examples, but you know, Fiori just takes this to a whole different level in terms of usability, and I think that leads to better adoption and the ability to kind of embed some of these processes, just because it's so much easier to use. And you know, SAP is constantly adding to it. So that's the other thing, is what you think you know today is probably going to be different in 6 months. So always have to stay ahead of the game.
100%.
A lot of innovations are coming in quickly.
Oh, that's exciting, actually, if you think about it, that, you know, we're staying at the cutting edge, and we have this great opportunity to do that. And of course, what it does, you know, if we look at that model, you know, just about the end-to-end integration, it's not just in the EM space. You know, we have this opportunity, I think, and it's going to become more and more prevalent. We had one of our guys was attending a conference the other day and came back from that conference indicating, guys, you know, this whole notion of alignment between enterprise asset management, production planning, and project systems at that. This whole world is starting to come closer and closer and closer together. And as we talk about an end-to-end value chain, we need to be mindful of that. What are the impacts? And I loved what you said early on about the change management piece, because that's exactly where the cross-functional teams or process-aligned teams and the change management dynamics that need to be put in place actually allow their heads to raise. And we can see it in this particular slide here, that overlay of the end-to-end supply chain and the integration with other functionalities, how important that is going to be as we go forward. Okay. Anything else on that one, just Jason, before I go to the next?
I think we probably need to move. Kelly's going to shut us down here in a minute. We're getting kind of long-winded.
All right, so we really want to make sure plan, schedule, and actual is in place. So from a visibility point of view, I think there's tremendous opportunities. If we think about, what's out there in terms of EAM, we're starting to see that the primary capabilities that add value really are coming to the fore inside of the S4 space, S4HANA space. And here I think we start to see that picture, what we mentioned earlier on, with portfolio and project management, asset operations, environmental health, networks, etc. How this all starts to come together and play into place. And to use that functionality, we need to get our foundational dynamics in place ahead of time. And that, of course, drives us into the whole notion of performance analysis. How do we make sure that we're staying ahead and we're identifying where our issues are, where our opportunities lie, etc. And if one is looking to focus around reliability, there's some key questions which we probably want to be asking ourselves around, well, what exactly do we want this asset to do? What is this asset? What could do? What might happen in terms of it failing? And if it does fail, what do we want out of it? What are the causes of any failures that happen? And then as an outcome of that, what happens with each of those failure occurrences? And what are the consequences? And what are we going to do to prevent it? So we see a very nice performance analysis process that can be informed, directed and guided by the fact that we've got the functionality in place, we got the data that we can see, and we have visibility into and around the system. And the reason that's so important is that because if you think about our decision matrix, this is going to help us with that, is to say, well, in that decision matrix, what are we doing? Are we doing a run to fail? Is that our strategy and approach? Or do we want something that's time directed or condition based? It really does start to help us from a performance point of view in terms of making those specific decisions. And then overlaid on top of that, if we think about some of the analytics that are available and how that will ultimately move towards AI, we want to be in a position to get to the predictive and prescriptive environment. It's easy enough to say, well, what happened? That's a descriptive notion. Diagnostic, why did it happen? But then we need to start moving into what could happen and when. Now we're getting into the predictive space. And ultimately, we're getting into a prescriptive base about what action then do we take as we move this forward. So I think from a performance analysis point of view, really helpful. And underpinning all of that then as well is our work management program. So in terms of the work management program, here's a high-level process flow of what work management is about. We're identifying issues, we're planning to resolve them, we're scheduling the work, we're executing it, and we're closing it out. And as a result of that, we need to have these processes defined, understand them, make sure our cross-functional teams are all at the same place, and that everyone is aware of the benefits that this brings to the business. And I think, Jason, you mentioned what's in it for me. And that notion of if we understand some of the benefits, we will start to very quickly and very clearly see the what's in it for me. And taking that same view, if we just look at that inside of SAP itself, we start to see what the collaboration requirements are about. There's a significant need for collaboration. And our work management program is going to require that and drive it. And we start to see those players. I mean, here around scheduling and planning, production, there's maintenance, there's supply chain. But there are other departments like engineering, there's finance, HR, projects, and so on, that we have to come together with and make sure that we have safety and health issues in place, that we are all managing and dancing to the same tune and using that functionality to get us to the change dynamic that we're after. So I think, Jason, that kind of sets the scene for our final section, because the final section is really around, okay, let's just quickly talk about some new capabilities within S4 and within Fiori. What are some of those? Why is this user experience so important? And how do we streamline and manage things as we as we go forward. So I'm going to hand that over, Jason, to you to talk to us about the new capabilities and some of the dynamics as it relates to the S4 environment.
Sure. So we talked earlier about the fact that, there's not a lot of like brand new stuff in S4. I mean, if you did a technical upgrade and didn't implement Fiori, it would look an awful lot like it did the day before, the day you cut over. Fundamentally, it is cleaned up a little bit. It's more efficient. You've got, the table structures, the better finance stuff, but really Fiori is the game changer. But there are some things in here that are interesting, that are fairly new innovations. One is they've cleaned up the equipment and tools management a little bit. Availability checks are a bit more flexible. You can do reorgs really quickly, so that you can reallocate materials based on the priority of the order. And you can check some of those off so that it doesn't happen if you don't want it to. So you have pretty good control over that. And in a Fiori app, it's pretty slick. They've introduced this process phases and subphases model. So if you're familiar with user statuses, this kind of makes it a bit more intuitive. And there's some approval processes that can be implemented around there too. So you look at that and it's a bit more in English. The user statuses and system statuses are still there if you want to use them, but this phased approach is pretty new and pretty neat to look at. There's a lot of you mentioned the decisions around risk and criticality. So there's some new matrix capabilities in there that make that easier to figure out. And then coupled with some of the cloud applications that I'll talk about in a second, can really take that to a different level. Checklist is a neat function now where it's a little bit different than say a task list, where I'm just going to do a safety checklist when I execute this production order, or at the end I have a certain inspection that has to be done. All that can be enabled now in S4. And if you happen to have the asset manager solution, the mobile application, then it can be executed from the mobile app as well. So again, a lot of things that are pretty similar to what we had in ECC, but taken to a slightly different level with Fiori. And the rotables management with subcontracting monitors is another area where they've really ramped it up and made it a little bit more usable. I'd also highlight from a scheduling perspective, you've had a couple screenshots in here of the planning board in S4. S4 also introduces the resource scheduling for HANA tool, which is an add-on that that has some additional scheduling capabilities. For those out there that might be using MRS, RSH comes with the MRS license, so it's not a replacement of MRS. They complement each other. So something to keep in mind if you're in that world. But just in core S4, it's quite a bit better, and Fiori again takes it to a different level.
Okay, which then
our next slide is about.
And that guides us to the whole user experience piece, right? Jason? Okay, let's go there.
So, one of the things that SAP has been accused of is being difficult to use, and that impact the ability to get people to adopt it well. So Fiori, with this role-based user experience, just helps with that. You're not everyday users, or maybe you're not super advanced users. When they log in, they just see the tiles that they need to see. They're able to execute the things they need to do. And everybody lives in this world where they have the phone, and it's hard to understand why when I go to work, I don't have that same experience. And so Fiori gets us a little bit closer to that.
Okay.
Helps with training, helps with adoption, all of that. And the other thing that it does is it allows SAP to innovate a little bit quicker, because they can update these Fiori apps and add features fairly quickly. And so that's part of why we keep seeing these new functionality dumps. But you can see some screenshots here of how, just a bit more intuitive. Again, the tiles, that can all be configured by user role, so that depending on what your role is, if you're a procurement analyst or a maintenance planner or a mechanic or technician, when you log in, you're going to see things that are different than what someone else might see. And it just, you don't have to remember transaction codes. You've got all these different options that you can do. And it's flexible. It can be customized if you want to, although out of the box, it's pretty good. So again, that user experience just drives adoption. It drives data integrity because we can control the process by kind of channeling everybody into doing what we want them to do.
Right, right, okay. And I suppose there are some other capabilities that you'll talk about for enhancing that user experience that we've seen. You spoke about maintenance planning, but maybe just take us through these key capabilities that will enhance that user experience, Jason.
Yeah, so again, you kind of see, this is a view of the backlog. So Fiori helps to kind of bucketize that work and make it a little bit prettier to look at. The costing capabilities we talked about earlier with the finance improvements in S4. Mass generation of notification. There's a little bit more in terms of mass capabilities and moving things around more frequently. Scheduling, definitely better, much more intuitive and more flexible in S4. This is one of my favorites. We're big here on optimizing inventories and finding opportunities. And this new inventory turnover analysis app is really cool in terms of doing that. So if you're familiar with MC.9 potentially and dual classification in ECC, this inventory turnover app is great. It's drag and drop. It's got bubble charts, and it gives you that picture where you can quickly identify opportunities for inventory optimization. So love that one. Looking forward to using that a lot.
So these are all basically some new capabilities that come with S4. Align that with what you spoke about earlier on the Fiori tiles, and really we've got quite a rich place to go to in order to make all of this align. And I think, you spoke about the necessity of integration and how that continues as well.
Absolutely. So again, we talked about the digital core earlier, and EAM being a part of that. Well, then you have this whole cloud offering from SAP, whether that's Ariba or some other things that they're kind of bolt-ons. Then they enable integration with outside of your organization, whether that be suppliers or customers or others. So yeah, that you get the foundation in, you get that digital core in, and then you can start to open things up and look outside. And I think as we lead into the next one to talk about some of the advanced maintenance features that SAP is bringing to the table. So the whole cloud suite called the Intelligent Asset Management suite of solutions, and this changes a lot too. And it used to be predictive maintenance. The branding has changed quite a bit, but ultimately it comes down to this stuff was designed by reliability engineers for reliability engineers. And when you look at the tools, it's very intuitive. It's very tightly integrated to S4 or even ECC if you're still there through OData and some of that. So it really gives you true mobility. So Asset Manager, I mentioned earlier, the mobile app runs off of this cloud platform, and that gives you true mobility, including offline, which is hard to do with just Fiori. And so it's got RCM, it's got failure mode and effects analysis, it's got enhanced stability around master data, and again, it's all integrated with S4. So you can do those checklists that I mentioned and push those out to Asset Manager. You can evaluate your preventative maintenance plans, and you can evaluate your strategies on your assets and then push some of those updates back down to S4. So it just takes things to a different level. So once you've matured your process in ECC or in S4 itself, once you have that data integrity in place, then this is another step in the maturity curve where now you can introduce your predictive, you can get true mobility, and really start diving into the analysis of your strategy and making sure that you have the right plan for each asset.
Okay, so I think, folks, that kind of brings us towards the end to the question and answers of this. Now, we went through some strategy dynamics, we went through some issues relating to visibility, we went through some issues relating to the day-to-day workings of work management and the like. We went through some user experience information as it relates back to Fiori, etc. And we've looked now at some of the call it the what ifs, what's coming down the pipe, basically, so to speak, the art of the possible, if you want to call it that. And so we're at that point. I mean, I'm not sure, Kelly, if you've had any questions come into the pipeline, which Jason and I could handle at this time.
Yeah, so I do have a couple questions from the audience. Let's start with the first one, which is, what are some typical opportunities for moving from ECC to S4HANA?
All right, Jason, let me get that one. Well, some typical opportunities. Clearly, the first is just to start from scratch, start over, do a greenfield. That's a big decision to make, and there's the potential of losing a lot of history and some of the data we've had in the system up until now. But that certainly is one of the options. A second option to make that move would be to first make sure we clean up the process. You know, Jason spoke early on around clutter, and he spoke about some of the junk we have in the system, and maybe our processes are not quite where they need to be. So we really do need to clean it up, clean up the data, get the processes going, and then we could do a migration out of a clean ECC environment across into the S4 environment. That certainly is one of my preferences in terms of approach. The other is for organizations to do the migration, migrate to S4, and then as off the back of that, to then come and to unpack an optimization focus, which may also require getting rid of some clutter and stuff at the back, but certainly making sure that the business objectives, the strategies, the processes, system integration, everything is aligned with each other. So I would argue those are probably the three core main ones, Kelly, around opportunities for moving from ECC to S4.
Thanks, Sean. The next question we have is, you guys talked about different approaches for migrating to S4. Do you have any recommendations on the ideal approach?
Well, I think I'm going to throw that over to Jason.
This kind of builds on the last one, I guess. So, yeah, I think greenfield is a big decision, like you said, Sean. I feel like I mean, it can be compelling too, just because you can clean up the clutter all in a hurry. But where I feel like that makes a lot of sense is in maybe a big company with several legacy ERP instances. Maybe they're not even all SAP. Maybe you've grown through acquisition and just have fragmented systems and processes. Heavily customized SAP is another area where you know, there's a lot of, if you've really heavily customized, it's not super compatible with S4, and there can be a lot of development work to get that in line. So that might be a case where you would consider taking the leap and going greenfield. And even further there, you know, a lot of folks are doing kind of a tiered approach where if I've got multiple legacy instances, I may migrate finance first to get consolidated financials and some of the advanced planning capabilities there, and then migrate other business processes in over time to kind of smooth the transition. And in a way, you can almost fund the transition because you're seeing some financial benefits along the way. So it's another way. It's a little bit less intimidating than just ripping the Band-Aid off and diving in with a brand new system completely all at once. You know, you've got the brownfield approach that is more of what you talked about as a migration, so an upgrade of your existing solution. This is great if you have less customization, and it's even better if you can do that upfront work to kind of clean that up and you know, optimize and get more towards standard and best practices up front before you migrate over to S4. You know, I feel like it just makes that migration a whole lot better, a whole lot easier. And again, if you do that well, you're going to see tangible financial benefits along the way that can offset some of the cost of the S4 migration. It's big decisions. You know, there's a lot of different opinions on it, and you know, you hear a lot about there's tools that you can do selective data migration and stuff, but which is great. You don't have to archive and things like that. But at the end of the day, if I've got a backlog full of junk, I mean, that's still real supply and demand that needs to go into my new system. I can't just ignore it. Right. So I like the idea of cleaning up ahead of time.
All righty. Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. Absolutely right. All right, Kelly, any others?
Yeah, one more from the audience today. Do we really have to use Fiori?
No, you do not. If you want, and a lot of SAP customers do this. They do more of a technical upgrade where they stick with the old SAP GUI view, which is enhanced a little bit in S4, but you don't have to do Fiori. There are, as we talked about, a lot of benefits to Fiori, and there's going to be a lot of innovation in that space. But then maybe that it is a technical challenge from an IT perspective. It's new and it adds on to the complexity of the migration. So it may be something you look at doing after the fact, but it's definitely something that I mean, we harped on this quite a lot in this session, and it's definitely something to very seriously look into at some point down the road, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah, I like that comment, Jason. You say something to be seriously considered, because I think from what we've seen in our experience, it does add a good deal of value. But as with anything that's coming on board that's new, one needs to put in place the right support structures, the right education processes, and teach people exactly how, why, where, and how to use it. I think that would really be important.
That's huge. Yeah, I feel like that's the one that we always skip over.
Right.
One that probably has the most impact in terms of a successful outcome.
Yeah, isn't it weird? You do an implementation, and the ones at the end that struggle with it is the training piece or the education. We shortcut it or we shortchange it as we go. But absolutely right that that's strategically important.
And even there, we spend hours and hours and hours of training, and it's largely click here, click here, click here, click here. It's not really understanding what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's about building critical thinking. I think is where we need to go to. Build critical thinking, use these tools, get a better business outcome.
Yep.
Kelly, are there any other questions? No, that was the last question from our audience. So if you can move to that next slide for me. I want to thank everyone for participating today and throughout the 2022 webinar series. Great information has been shared with us. And this webinar is going to be available later today on our website under the Insights tab. You'll also find some previously recorded webinars and other educational content such as white papers, blogs, and some success stories. And at the start of the new year, we will send out some information for our upcoming series, which you can see here for 2023. And whether you are preparing to implement, migrate, or you are already gone live in S4, it's important to know the major differences so you can leverage the full capabilities of your SAP investment. And this upcoming series is going to be starting in February of next year. It's the business guide to ECC versus S4HANA in new planning features and functions, production finite scheduling, extended warehouse management, and more of the areas that you can see here, and a lot more. So we'll be sending out a reminder as we get closer to the date. And again, thank you, Jason and Sean, and all the attendees for joining us today and this past year. I want to let y'all, have a great holiday and a happy new year, and we will see you next year.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Well, have a great day.